741, Big 550, KTRS. Jane Duker, former Chief of Staff to Governor Holden, and House Majority Leader John Deal. John, we'll start with you, and that is talk about schools, everything including the transfer bill, Normandy, and the education side of it. Take your pick. Where do you want to go with this one?
Well, schools have certainly become a political football. And maybe I'll start with the funding, and we'll let Jane transition into Normandy here. Yeah,
transfer
transition
over.
Or transfer.
Transfer over to transfer.
We could take the new loop trolley.
We'll start with schools.
Okay. Try to tie it all together here. So, one thing that we've heard a lot over the past week about some scare tactics that the governor's been doing on education funding in the budget. Our fiscal year started this year, and one of the things that I find disturbing or troublesome on this are the games that are being played with elementary and secondary education. That the governor has withheld $160 million from elementary and secondary education after he committed in the State of the Union address to make that the top priority, and we also made it the top priority in funding. But the game that's being played with that is we also have a process called the supplemental budget, which is if there's extra money in a budget halfway through the budget year, we come in and we appropriate that money in January. So when we started this budget cycle, we asked the governor, do you want to set aside any supplemental money for a supplemental budget in January of 2015? And they indicated that they did not. And it's important to note that only a governor can initiate a supplemental budget process. The legislature cannot decide to do that on its own without a governor's request. So what he just did was he set aside $150 million for a supplemental budget in January, and then turned around and withheld $160 million from schools, saying the budget was out of whack.
Right.
So he needs to release that supplemental money. He's not going to get a supplemental budget so long as there's money being withheld from schools. And
why is he doing that?
Well, because he's trying to scare the education establishment to encourage us not to override his vetoes on some tax policy bills.
Gotcha.
And then he'll release the money. So, so I've been out communicating pretty hard to the schools and to higher ed that that money is there. It needs and going to be released, and don't be subject to hijacking and scare tactics.
Jane Duker.
I mean, the only response I have to that is that, somebody has to be the adult in the room, and when they start giving away a bunch of money, somebody actually has to balance the budget and somebody has to pay the bills. And so the governor is the only one that can do that once you're in a budget year. So it's real easy to
But we're
snip and
down
snipe.
revenue-wise, are we not?
Yes.
From what we projected?
Yes.
John, is that?
Well,
Yes.
we were down. That's last fiscal year.
Okay.
So it was down. That fiscal year is over. So these withholds he's announcing are prospectively for the current fiscal
But that's why they're
year.
withholds. He can give them back if revenues come in properly and we can pay our bills.
But Jane, you agree with me that only a governor can do a supplemental.
Correct. The governor is
Okay.
the only one who can propose a supplemental.
And if he's setting aside $150 million for a supplemental, that means, in theory, that there's going to be $150 million more than we thought was going to be there. And you ought not to be holding back $150 million for a supplemental while at the same time going to the foundation formula and saying, I'm withholding your money because the money's not there.
Well, this is the problem, though.
It's inherently inconsistent and disingenuous.
Wait, this is the problem, though. You can't, if there's going to be a shortfall at the end of a budget year, there's not enough money in the budget to withhold at the end. You have to prepare. If you think there is going to be a shortfall, you can't take care of it in the last 3 months of the year. Unfortunately, the way that Missouri's budget is organized, the only revenue that the governor has any control over, which is the general revenue, which is only about less than a third of the total budget of the state. The biggest chunks of those money are Medicaid and education. The most unrestricted money we have is education. So unfortunately, when there is a huge deficit or a proposed or a probable deficit, the only place to go to get the money in order to make sure you save enough to get through the fiscal year and pay your bills is education. That's a problem. The governor said, if you all do a bunch of tax giveaways, this is going to happen. And they did give the giveaways. He said this is going to happen. Now, if the revenue estimates are wrong, then a withhold means he can release the money. It's not we're taking the money forever. It's We're going to make sure that we control the rate of spending over the course of the year. That's what adults do. They plan their expenses and their revenues, and they try to do. And Missouri has always been a conservative fiscal state, and we have a AAA bond rating for a reason because we have adults sitting in that chair.
But adults also don't scare children. Okay, and if he's being an adult, he doesn't use children as pawns and set aside one pot of money that he's going to come back to us to reappropriate in January, while at the same time telling the children of the state that the money's not there and I'm going to have to force you to cut your budgets.
Jane, let's talk about Normandy.
Normandy. So, as suspected, Ladue is so far, I believe, the only school.
Half. It's going to take half.
Well, it's going to take 32 kids.
Okay.
33 kids. So out of the 2,200 transfer kids, we've got 32 that get to go back to the school so far
But
that they went to last
University
year.
City, Francis Howell,
Ferguson, Florissant.
all said thank you, no thank you, go back. We don't want you.
And now, and this is where I don't agree with the State Board of Education and the governor saying that somehow this is the fault of the receiving districts, because it's really not. It's the state board's job to set education policy. If they wanted to cut off the transfer program, which there is some legitimate policy reasons to do that. You don't want to drain districts. You want community schools. Everybody agrees you don't destroy districts. They're community anchors. That's the best way to educate kids. So I understand that they don't want to take all the money out of Normandy. The problem is you started this machine when you allowed the first set of transfers to go. And to me, what I am focused on right now is the kids in Normandy. They got to choose their school. They went, they made the hard decision, and now we're yanking them back. The state broke this. They allowed the unaccreditation to happen. They allowed these kids to move. They need to let these kids finish, and they need to keep the money in Normandy. And so I think the state ought to pay for what they broke. We didn't set up a solution to prevent transfers. That's the state's fault. It's not these kids' fault. I think they get to go to the school they chose, and you don't take the money out of Normandy. And the state board reaffirmed again that they're going to let these kids languish, and
we sat
strongly
here on
disagree.
this show exactly
a year
just
ago.
about 1 year ago.
Right.
Okay. And I called on Desi to do at that time exactly what they're doing now.
Right.
And that is to take control of the Normandy School District.
Before the transfer happened.
But before all that happened.
Right.
And they they chose not to do that, and,
right.
and there was no leadership from the governor on this, and there was no bully pulpit to keep this from happening. Now, so these kids are getting snapped around like a rubber band, and
yeah.
it's a shame. And what I really worry about are the kids that are juniors and seniors.
Right.
There, because
they're
bouncing back and forth, and they're going to get a high school diploma from a school that isn't accredited or not accredited, or it's non-accredited.
Or non-existent now.
Right. And so that's a real problem. So one thing I'm working on that I think would be a real benefit to these juniors and seniors is trying to get the community, from a policy standpoint, getting the community colleges to come in this year and educate those juniors and seniors, where they not only get a GED, but they also get some sort of work certificate,
right,
or dual accreditation when they get out of school. Not all those students are going to be college bound in those districts, but they have some sort of job skill in addition to whatever a Normandy high school diploma is worth,
right,
so they can get out in the workforce and hopefully have at least a chance to survive or compete, or if they want to go to community college, that groundwork has been laid, or if they want to go to a four-year institution, that groundwork is laid by an institution that really kind of knows what they're doing. Now,
how close are you to getting that done?
I've had substantial conversations this week, and I think there's a lot of interest.
And I can't imagine that a lot of people would not be supportive of that. There's a lot of things we can do.
Do you have to pass a law? Do you have to talk to the governor about this? I mean, how much power do you have to do this?
I think there may be money. Because
workforce development?
Because of all these students coming back to Normandy now. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're going to actually get a lot more money. And
but the problem is, though, that money goes to unaccredited. They're not unaccredited anymore.
Well, but a lot of that money is Normandy's not going to have the outflow of money. So they budgeted for a lower amount because they thought more students would be gone. They're going to have more students, so they're going to get more money, and hopefully with some professional management in there, that they'll realize that there's some wiggle room in there where they could come in and work on a dual accreditation. So we've been talking about that, and hopefully we'll make some progress on that this year.
I just, not knowing how all this process works, and you guys are masters at, hey, look at the spin and deflect and all this and that. But a year ago, the rule said this.
Right.
1 year later, no other law has been changed,
right.
but this law has been regulated
it's now different.
out.
Right.
So
well, now it's
no
different.
laws. So you talk about regulators running the world,
right?
And we never elected one of these DESI people.
Nope.
No one knows any of these DESI people. They're making decisions on laws that have already been passed.
They've eradicated the transfer program by administrative action, and I think there's not only a legal problem with it. I just think it's morally wrong to have whipsawed these kids.
The law they're using for their actions now was passed and signed last year at this time.
But that bill does not say you can say no accreditation.
Well, I'm not saying how they interpret. I'm saying
right.
their authority they're using now. That bill was in place.
You mean to take over the district?
Last year at this time.
Right.
Correct.
Which everybody agrees with. I don't think anybody
Correct.
disagrees that they should take over the district.
It had, because of the way our laws work, it had an effective date of August 28th. Okay, but that's, if you recall, last summer I was calling on saying, just
right.
say that's what you're going to do.
Right.
Starting August 28th. There's nothing to stop you from planning for that instance now and keeping all that from happening.
That's John Deal. Jane Duker back in a moment with our parting shot.